to be a Negro in this country
You want us to fight for you, but we can't fight for ourselves here?
is to be in a state of rage.
You're being pimped for your religion.
Almost all of the time.
A penny for your thoughts. A penny for your thoughts. 2 cents is an opinion. 2 cents is an opinion. But we've been blessed with wisdom. 3 cents is what we given. 3 cents is what we given.
We're not afraid to stand. We're not afraid to stand. We're not afraid of the moment.
Don't get it twisted. I am the mayor, but I'm a black woman first.
What's up, world? Welcome to another episode of the 3 Cents Podcast, where it is our business to give you more than our 2 cents. I'm your girl, Ashlei Rain, also your perspective advocate, always here with the homie.
The real Stacy B. Jones. What's going on, Ashley?
What's up, man? It's a difficult time right now. I know our tone is a little bit different. It's a new normal. It's just crazy. How you feeling, Stace?
Yeah, I'm really, if I'm honest, I'm really struggling on so many levels. There's just so much going on. I think that we were already in a very vulnerable state due to the global pandemic that we're dealing with. And, I think that we had intentions of coming back and talking about all of those things. But so much has occurred on top of what we were already dealing with on a global scale that on a national scale, we continue to be berated with incidents of injustice that have, erupted in interesting ways in the streets. How are you feeling?
Heavy, extremely heavy, extremely drained. It might be a little bit difficult for me to recap, but the whole George Floyd thing, man in Minneapolis who was arrested really for unknown reasons. At this point, we have no idea, but an officer, a couple of officers held him down while another officer had his knee in the man's neck while Mr. George Floyd was calling for his mom, essentially, which was super painful to watch. And also just saying that he couldn't breathe, and we watched this officer kill this man slowly. And I think that is the most difficult part of it, because in every situation that has happened prior to this, there has been room for justification, meaning people have said, well, the officer feared for his life, or it was a quick kill, meaning that he used, a firearm to take a person's life. But this one, we watched this man die slowly. And so I think all of humanity is feeling the weight of it. So it's been really difficult to digest, to accept, to consume, to live in this area where, it's just craziness, It makes me feel anxiety, actually.
Yeah, no, I can completely understand that. I think that, for the first time, I think that the attempts that have been made historically to justify these things, this was so egregious in nature that, as you stated, that room for justification has been stripped away
completely.
Therefore, it has been interesting to see people that may not have been as willing to acknowledge these matters of injustice before are enraged. I've even had people that I've worked with previously reach out to me, and say, hey, I didn't know, and that's a whole nother conversation, but for them to reach out to
we
me,
can
people
have
that
it
I don't
though.
even work with them. What's that?
I said, no, we can have that conversation. I think it's important for people to hear that part also,
When it's exhausting, but it's refreshing at the same time. Because we're trying to process so much in the moment that, one of the things that I shared on social media a few days ago is that, what we have is we have this rage that kind of is always bubbling beneath the surface because of the the experiences that we have on a regular basis. And so when these larger scale things, and so we'll talk about this in a little while, but so when we talk about microaggressions versus macroaggressions, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so because of microaggressions, it's like always gently stoking the flames of our rage.
Explain to
Because
people what microaggressions are for those that may not understand.
Okay. So microaggressions are those subtle and sometimes unconscious things that people say or do that somehow disparage another race or another group of people. And so microaggressions are things like when I step on the elevator, you clutch your purse, even though there's nothing menacing about me,
Right. Right.
that I'm
Right.
in my 3-piece suit, that I have on my glasses, that I'm well put together. But because of the color of my skin, you decide to clutch your purse a little bit tighter.
Right.
That's a
Right.
microaggression. When your children step
Versus.
in front of me because you've, not you they've been taught that that these people don't really have any value, so they step in front of me in the store as if I'm invisible. Those are
Right. Right.
microaggressions. But what we saw in Minnesota is clearly a macroaggression. So macroaggressions are these larger scale things that we see that are either systemic or very much overt that we see
Right.
occur. So what happened to George Floyd was a macroaggression. And so what a macroaggression then does is it pours gasoline and turns high winds onto um onto a fire that was already smoldering all along.
Mm-hmm.
And so you
Mm-hmm.
wonder why it goes from 0 to 100 so quickly within our society. It's because the flames have been gently stoked by microaggressions every day.
Right.
And
So it's
so there are things that we live
compounded.
with every day,
Absolutely.
you know.
Absolutely.
So it's rough.
So have you seen well, I mean, I know that you said that people have reached out to you that may not have reached out to you in the past.
Hmm.
Have you had a different experience with just people that you've encountered, bypassing or whatever, people of color, people that are not of color? Have you experienced anything different, in light of everything going on?
I can tell no one has said anything to me, but I can tell, because we're still, technically quarantined. I'm not moving around a lot, but I can tell that um, when I encounter, our Caucasian brothers and sisters, especially, they're they're wondering how I'm feeling. Like they're wondering what's going through his mind. They're wondering how I'm sizing them up. They're wondering. I
Right,
can just see
right,
it in their eyes that they're trying to size up my assessment of them.
right.
So I find that it seems to me, and maybe I'm just hypersensitive right now, but it seems to me that they're going out of their way to be more polite, you
Mm-hmm.
know to show that that they see me in these things. So I
Yeah.
think that there's an awareness on both sides right now.
Absolutely. But like I said earlier, I definitely feel the weight of it. My phone has been like blowing up from both, law enforcement officers, those of color, those not of color, and then just
Hmm.
friends that are curious about my perspective or how I'm doing. And I think even with the, you know, good intent of their gestures, it's extremely overwhelming. And
Yeah.
so I've had to turn the news off. It's hard to avoid though. Even in
Yeah.
the pandemic, being quarantined, there are still some things that I've had to take care of and move about.
Hmm.
And just being out in public, like you just feel the weight of it. Seeing like I got caught up in a protest earlier today, actually, in Castro Valley of all places. And for those of you that don't live in the Bay Area, this is not a city that you would think that there would be any type of protest, let alone a big one.
Right.
So I got caught in that. Just everything being boarded up, and the destruction has been frustrating. So like I feel layers of weight. I have the weight of being a Black person and what that means and how we can relate to these experiences. Because even me as a police officer, I filed a formal complaint against a San Francisco police officer that was working at the airport. This was years ago.
Hmm.
He pulled me over because I was actually dropping my friend off at the airport. We were sitting for a minute because she was
Hmm.
finishing up a story, but it was like not even like 5 minutes. So he
Hmm.
put his lights on, came to the car. I let him know that I was a fellow officer. We usually say for officer safety, there is a firearm in the car. I have my ID or badge or whatever. And he questioned that. He was like, how do I know that's real? You know what I'm saying? And he snatched
Wow.
my ID, he called it in, he confirmed all this stuff. He was so rude, like so rude. And I was so angry that I called and filed a formal complaint. They sent me a letter and said he didn't do anything wrong. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So to be black, to be an officer, to feel the weight of both of those things
Yeah.
is extremely difficult, you know?
Yeah.
And because it's like on one end, I know that there are several people, young black men that are alive today because I was just there.
Right.
In the uniform, this person of color is present. So we may not be able to, and I'm not generalizing. I'm not saying all white officers are racist or they, are ill-mannered or unprofessional, or I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
But I am confidently saying that I know that some of them are alive today because I was there, because our level of fear, or depending on what environment you've grown up in, you may not gauge a threat the same.
Right.
I've grown up in a family where people have elevated their voices out of passion and
Yep.
maybe not out of anger and frustration. But if you've grown up in a different environment where people kind of speak on a on a more monotone or a lower
Right.
tone, you may not feel like that's a threat. I mean,
Right.
you may feel like someone raising their voice is a threat to you, where I feel like, oh, well, I'm at home. This person is not threatening my life. They're just extremely either upset, extremely
Right.
passionate about what they're sharing. And so, yeah, it makes it very weighty and extremely difficult. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, 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 no. I was just gonna say, just to expound on that thought of kind of, the cultural, the lack of cultural awareness and the
Mm-hmm.
implicit bias that plays into so many things. Um, because even in the workplace, and I'm sure that you've experienced this as well, is that in knowing that I'm a black man, in knowing that basically any display of emotion whatsoever is perceived as hostile or angry, even if it's, completely justified by the situation at hand,
Right.
that we find ourselves in positions where we constantly have to suppress that, suppress that, 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 that feeling, suppress
Culture,
that
really.
emotion, you know? Yeah.
Right.
So it's
Right.
like, so I can think about, especially in my professional career, like, I remember working at a particular, medical facility here in the Bay Area, and this doctor kept poking at me, because he needed me to do something, but I had a number of priorities that were higher than the thing that he was requesting of me, and so it wasn't that his request was being ignored, but
Mm-hmm.
there were just some things that were more pressing that I needed to tend to, and so this particular doctor kept pressing me. And finally, like in the middle of a hallway, I snapped on him, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it shook him to his core, because, because I had been trained to, kind of be this more docile, kind of agreeable person, then I'll
Right.
lead you to believe that, maybe it's okay for you to do this, but you have to understand that any display of emotion on my behalf is going to be perceived in some really crazy way. So I have to keep this thing in check, only for my professional, well-being. But in terms of me personally, I'm
Mm-hmm.
ready to let you have it, because I feel like I'm
Right.
justified that, if you come at me or you disrespect me, or you engage in these microaggressions, or you take advantage of the fact that that I have to be this more docile person because I'm a person of color. And so you push it as far as you can. And it seems that you do it on purpose. Like, you set yourself up to get snapped on at some point, And so it's
Right.
it's exhausting.
extremely. And that brings me to a point. So someone asked me to do a job in Danville, Black Hawk area. And so, again, for those of you that are not familiar with this area that we live in, Danville and Black Hawk is an upper class neighborhood that's predominantly white. And I decline, and for a couple of reasons, because it's like things are so intense right now that even if I'm doing my job, and let's just say some ignorant person that happens to be not a non-person of color provokes or antagonizes me, if I'm defending myself, and I shoot this person, I imagine the headlines would read, former Oakland police officer or black woman shoots white person in Danville. And so the perception of that headline, it would be perceived as though I, out of anger, shot this man, not in defense of my life, So, but it's those types of things that are draining that we even have to think about. Like, I have to think about, do I accept a job because now my life depends on it? Whether that be I allow this person to be a threat, or I defend myself. Like I'm wrong, even if I'm right. You see what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
And then also, people have called me like, are you going to the protest? Are you going to participate in this? And there I'm conflicted, because then I have to deal with the ignorant person that may recognize me as a former officer that then wants to attack me because they may think I'm implanted and not fighting for the cause. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, I can't even fight for my people because you are attacking me in the fight. And I tell people, one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do in life, and I feel like I've done a lot in my short life, is stand on the front line during the Oscar Grant riots. Like something that happened in Oakland. I'm an Oakland police officer. They're throwing Molotovs at me, calling me Uncle Tom, spitting in my face, and yet I agree with their stance and why they're fighting. Like that's a soul fight. Like I'm fighting inside. Like, what am I doing? But I'm also trying to keep the peace because of what has happened. So it's like, it's not healthy, for a lack of a better explanation.
Let me ask you a question as someone that's been on the front lines. Like, what is your take on the difference between protesters and looters?
I mean, I think that, that's a hard question to answer. And I say that because I do think that there are people that are standing firm, that are peaceful, that are protesting in peace and don't want destruction. I also think that there are a lot of opportunists that see that just come to our city to destroy it, So of course I don't agree with the destruction of any property. I mean, even in my home and in my neighborhood, we've had residential area be affected, people busting car windows just for the sake of destruction, not even to take anything. And I'm not saying it would be better if they took something, but you know what I mean? Like, it's all bad. And at the same time, it's like, what is it going to take for us to see change? Because again, we continue to see this narrative play out over and over and over again. How many people, and it's sad too, because we've lost George Floyd. I'm sure other people that are not even named as a result of the same behavior and actions. And it's like, and then that cascade effect where you have other people dying in the midst of a protest because of the violence that's going on during that, so how many lives as a result of this one officer's behavior or this compounded behavior, you know what I mean? How many lives is it going to take for us to really see change? And those are the battles that I have, internally that I deal with, that I have to like turn the news off before I go crazy. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. No, it's such a multi-layered issue, because I understand where that rage comes from. And I know that there are even people that are destroying property, whereas I don't condone what they're doing by no means. But I understand where that rage comes from for some. Then, of course, there are always these agitators that are opportunists, as you stated, that come and do these things. And here's the interesting thing is that, I understand that in instances like this that are closely connected with race, that oftentimes people will put up signs that say Black owned business. That's happened for decades,
Mm-hmm.
that to try to help people to understand that, hey, I understand where you're coming from, but I'm with you. But
Right.
something that happened recently is that I have some friends of mine, literally a friend of mine who we've been friends since, you know, the fall of 1994. So we're talking, almost 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
Her and her husband, she's a white woman. Her husband is a person of color, not Black, but a person of color. And they own a cafe in Union Square in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And, she says that they watched on the security cameras as men with bats walked up and busted out the windows to their cafe. Now,
Mm.
understand that anyone that is in the food service industry in San Francisco is already struggling to make it because of COVID-19.
Right.
And so they had just not long ago reopened, and then they're going through, this tremendous amount of damage to the cafe that they just purchased last year, and have been, really working hard to try to make this work as they try to realize their dream. And so the thing is that to look at, this white woman, you would say, well, she is, our enemy. But when I tell you that from the day that I've met this woman, she's been a complete ally, to the point that when you look at her friends, her group of friends that are her closest friends, it looks like the United Nations. And
Mm.
she's very much herself. She doesn't try to be something that she's not. Genuine, authentic, good heart. But there's always this collateral damage that people that actually stand in solidarity with you are also, suffering loss as well. And I understand that people might think that, well, it's, these larger companies and this and that, and that's one thing. But, when it's the businesses of color and the mom and pop places, like, I don't want to see any property destroyed. But, there's collateral damage that I think that no one is really thinking, is that, a lot of this is just pure, reaction for those that,
Mm-hmm.
are really for the cause. And then it is, further inflamed by these agitators that really begin to shift the narrative away from what we're really trying to be focused on right now, which is justice.
Right, right. No, absolutely. And what I've noticed this time around is I do think there are a lot of people that are not Black fighting for us. I was talking to a friend earlier today, and she was extremely frustrated that she was at a protest in Oakland,
Hmm.
and her ratio was for every 200 white people or non-Black people there, that were there was one Black person,
Wow.
and so it was frustrating, like to a point where she was in tears explaining to me, like, why aren't we here?
Hmm.
Like I'm upset and I'm angry. And so what I told her, I mean, especially here, and I'm not saying that this is an excuse, this is no excuse, but
Hmm.
I think that on one end, so I think that there's a bunch of reasons why. I think on one end, it's hard. Like we fought, so you know how you in a boxing ring and you box and you punch and then you running out of breath, and then at
Yeah.
some point, like, you got to put your arms down to
Yeah.
regroup.
Yeah.
And it's like you
Yeah.
can get hit so many times, but at some point you got to rest. And so I feel
Yeah.
like that's where we are as people of color, is that we've been in the ring. They just
Right.
now getting in, stepping in for us, but we've been in here and we've been taking so many blows. I think a lot of us are just weighed down.
Yeah.
And then I think also, I told her in California, I think it's also different because, and again, this is no excuse, but when you have, first of all, the pandemic, where
Hmm.
people are sheltering in place, you have people of color that are more susceptible or battling underlying illnesses. So, you have these big gatherings. We're probably not the first to run to those, especially if you got little ones at home that you're
Right.
actively taking care of. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? And then on
Yeah.
top of that, we got the cost of living just in California alone. So people are trying to protect whatever little coins they have, and fighting this fight that we've been fighting for a long time. Is like,
Right.
you gotta be really, like, strategic and careful with the decisions that you make concerning this protest. And so I told her, I think here, especially in the Bay Area, that is like completely diluted, I would say,
Hmm.
of, a lot of people have left like the East Bay to go further inland. It's
Yep.
just, I think it cost us a lot to fight that fight and then not see results and still end
Right.
up in the same place. So I think a
Yeah.
lot of us have not given up, but we're just tired,
No, I agree. I agree completely. I get that as well, which is why I think that people have to figure out what it is that because we can't do everything. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody is not good at everything, and we can't do everything as individuals. We can't be a piece of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to figure out what it is that we can be committed to and what it is that we can be consistent with, and get in that lane and stay there. Everybody's going to have a lane, but as long as all those lanes are pointing toward the general, destination that we know that we need to go,
Mm-hmm.
then we continue to have progress. And so there are things that you are good at. There are things that you are inherently gifted at that fit within the context of your personality, that if you commit to them, you can remain passionate about them. You will remain committed to them. You will remain you will remain consistent in that commitment, and it will help our cause to move forward. And so if you try to do it all, then of course it'll never get done. But there's something that you can do. And I think
Right.
that what COVID-19 has also helped us to do is to understand that everything that we were out here doing wasn't necessary. So a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the stuff that we've been running around doing was absolutely unnecessary. A lot of the money that
Yeah.
we were spending, a lot of the places that we were going, we were doing because it's what we like to do, but it's
You
not
mean like
something that's
pre-COVID?
necessary.
You mean
Yeah,
pre-COVID, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there was so much that we were out doing pre-COVID that COVID-19 helped you to say, you know what? I was out here spending money and doing stuff that I really didn't need to do. I was just
Mm-hmm.
doing it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so now that I kind of have that wake up call that was, handed to me, I have to ask myself, okay, if and when, things begin to open back up, what needs to stay gone because it wasn't a high priority, it really wasn't adding any significant value to my life or the best use of the time that God has given me. And what might I need to put more energy toward, because I'm now seeing that there are just some more important things in life that I need to
Mm-hmm.
have some consistent commitment to, because the implications are not only for my life, but the lives of my children and my grandchildren, and those that I care about as well.
It's uh frustrating, you know?
Yeah.
It's
No.
frustrating. It feels like a 1 million piece jigsaw puzzle,
Yeah.
trying to just figure it out and put the pieces together to paint this picture that everyone can see and understand like what this is, and I feel like each one of us, black people, are a piece of that puzzle, and we're just trying to get them to see.
Yeah.
But it's
No doubt.
hard. It's hard when you're just a piece of the puzzle, and especially when society, quote unquote, the system or whomever
Hmm.
has promoted dissension amongst us. It makes it
Yeah.
even more difficult. Like, okay, our music doesn't call for us to stand together. Our TV shows don't say that we stand together. Our Black dollar doesn't say that we stand together or support each
Yeah.
other. So we're fighting multiple fights.
Yeah.
It's like we're trying to call each other brother, sister, and say stand up, but at the same time it's like, man, you ain't gonna outdo me. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? And
Right.
and because of what we, like I said, what we watch, what we listen to, we have that ingrained in us, and we're trying to undo and unlearn as well as renew. And
Hmm.
it's like, you're doing two totally different things simultaneously. It's hard, really hard.
Yeah. I have, I've been hearkening back to a lot of um, I've been looking back at a lot of our literary figures, and some of the things that they have shared, um, over the years. And there's this quote by James Baldwin that says,
To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all of the time. And in one's work, and part of the rage is this: it isn't only what is happening to you, but it's what's happening all around you and all of the time in the face of the most extraordinary and criminal indifference, the indifference of most white people in this country, and their ignorance. Now, since this is so, it's a great temptation to simplify the issues under the illusion that if you simplify them enough, people will recognize them. I think this illusion is very dangerous because, in fact, it isn't the way it works. A simple thing a complex thing can't be made simple. You simply have to try to deal with it in all its complexity and hope to get that complexity across.
And I guess the only thing that I would dispute with such a towering literary figure as James Baldwin, if I dare, is to say that it isn't almost all the time, that it is indeed all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
That is all the time. And so it kind of goes back to, what I was talking about earlier in terms of, those microaggressions constantly gently stoke the flames of that rage,
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
it's all, it just, when you think it's gone out, you encounter something, you see something, you feel something that lets you know, nah, there are some people that are still just going to see you, like I live in Vallejo, California. Right. And, grew up here, born and raised. I've lived a few other places, but this is home. And we have a black city councilman who's a few years older than me. And on one of the social media, on a Facebook group, there was a woman that literally began to refer to him in this Facebook group, and right out there, in the social media public, referred to him as an uppity Negro in 2020, and like thought that this was okay. Now, mind you, that one of the things that I have been proudest of, is that I grew up in this city of Vallejo, which has been recognized as one of the most diverse cities in the country. I've talked about this on the pod before.
Right.
And so part of growing up here, and what I'm proud of, is that, that my street looked like the United Nations, that, my classmates, we were all very diverse, but we literally were like family. Of course, people, gravitate toward what they are to some degree or another because we connect on that cultural level. But that didn't prevent us from mixing and mingling and loving on and supporting one another, and so that's just the way that I grew up. And I was always grateful for that because, as I moved around, it helped me to be able to appreciate people and to appreciate our differences, and not to look at those things as points of, divergence, but look at them as points of strength as we came together to do things together, whether that was in the workplace or in our community. I always thought that there was strength in our diversity.
Right.
And so to see someone in my own community that has always embraced such high levels of diversity refer to a city councilman elected by the people. As a matter of fact, he was the highest vote getter in his election, to refer to him as an uppity Negro. I mean, it was literally, it was sickening.
Yeah,
It was
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that also speaks to, some people may feel, or I should say white people may feel like we are speaking about them, especially white officers may feel like we're bunching them up in this group of unprofessional murderers, and I think that speaks volumes also, because we're not doing that. But I think oftentimes law enforcement in general does that to Black people. Like, even I'll speak to that even when I was in the academy. It's like they'll say, okay, a robbery happens and the description is a Black guy, black hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans. Well, if you see a group of Black men and they have on black hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, what's the likelihood of them being one of the people? Is extremely high, is what they'll tell you. But as a Black person, and one of your family members, if not even yourself, may have a black hooded sweatshirt and blue jeans, on the other end of that what it feels like to be stopped when it's not you, And so it's like, yeah, you're fishing in a pond, but does that make it right? And are we helping, or are we contributing to the problem that it has been? And I also, as an officer, I understand that conflict is like, no suspect wears a shirt that says, hey, I did it. What I mean? So it's like, yeah, it is a guessing game. But what I would do when I was an officer is, okay, you give me a description, right? So let's say you give me a description: white t-shirt, blue jeans, Nikes, and maybe a baseball cap. Right. okay, there's a lot of in a black male, they might say that
Yeah.
20s, whatever description they give me. But that is pretty much the profile for a lot of young men, and I think again that speaks to this system that paints this picture of us. Okay, a lot of rappers or hip hop people dress like this, so let me dress like this and then they show money, so let me present as if I have money. But what I would do is I would stop them and they'd be like, "Why you stopping me? You harassing me?" I would take my mic out of my ear and I would say, "Hey, dispatch, can you read back the description for me?" So they could hear it. And I would turn it up and they would say, "Hey, suspect description, male, black, white t-shirt, blue jeans, Nikes, baseball cap." And then I would look at them and I would say, "Would you stop you?" And they'd be like, "No, you right, you right." I'd be like, "Hey, if you
Yeah.
didn't do nothing wrong, then we good,
Right.
But and if you did, then you caught, you know what I'm saying? But I also think a lot of that has to do with my respect for people, that I'm not just about to handcuff you, not tell you why I'm stopping you and throw you in the
Right.
back of the car until I figured out if you that person or not. I'm going to
Right.
communicate, and I get it's a balancing act, because as an officer, if you the only thing standing between somebody and their freedom, they don't care about your life. I get that
Right.
there are those. And I've seen some situations where people have been wilding out,
Right.
and I've seen situations where people are combative and not compliant, and you get like 15 of those in a row in a day. So the 16th person you're expecting to be like that and they're not, but I think a lot of officers fall into the trap of, I'm going to treat this person like the 15 I just encountered because they're probably no different. And I
Right.
think that is the biggest mistake that we make, is you can't treat everybody the same, just even based on your 15 bad experiences. This is still a different and new one. And then there are some exceptions when you have repeat offenders or people that that have done stuff. But I still feel like it's a broken system. It wasn't made for us. Even being a part of it, I could confidently say that. And it's just hard because in one aspect, you want to be like, "Oh, I don't want to work for a system that's not for me." But then in another tone, you want to say, but they need us there because, like I
Right.
said earlier, because I was present, somebody's alive. So,
Right.
like I said, that dichotomy is super difficult and super heavy. You mentioned earlier quotes from some of our like literaries and leaders, and one that I find extremely powerful is Malcolm X wrote a speech. It's called "On Black People in War." He says, if violence
is wrong in America, violence is wrong abroad. If it's wrong to be violent, defending black women and black children and black babies and black men, then it's wrong for America to draft us and make us violent abroad in defense of her. And if it is right for America to draft us and teach us how to be violent in defense of her, then it is right for you and me to do whatever is necessary to defend our own people right here in this country.
I think that's extremely powerful. And what you'll find is that's not an easy speech to find. You know
Right.
what I'm
I
saying?
bet.
When you type
I
up
bet.
Malcolm X speeches, that's not one that's going to come up first. But he's absolutely right. Like, you want us to fight for you, but we can't
Yeah.
fight for ourselves here? That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. No, I just happened to see, um, a clip on social media today where this preacher, she was delivering this message, and she was essentially saying how, from a biblical perspective, how we see ourselves as, those that are still impacted by the original sin of Adam. There are things that we encounter because of the original sin of Adam. However, this country has original sin, and so we see ourselves as people that are still underneath the impact of the original sin of Adam. But somehow the people that those that have committed the original sin of this country are able to disconnect themselves from it, but we're still supposed to be connected to the original sin of Adam, and how, just from a spiritual perspective, how, it makes our gospel of none effect if, there isn't a responsibility on both sides of that equation. And so it
Right.
was just a powerful, and I wish I knew who she was. I had to go back and look at it because I want to give her credit. But it was a powerful illustration of exactly what it is that we encounter in this country. But I think that with what we're seeing right now is that, our people are not allowing there to be this divorce from the original sin of this country to occur. Like, no, I understand that you may not have been the one to commit it, but you're not going to be able to divorce yourself from the responsibility and the implications of it. Um,
So let me ask you this: what do you think about Gavin? So Gavin Newsom, he said,
Every moment when you're in it feels like it's a different moment. Every moment when we're in it, we feel like, well, this time we're going to do things fundamentally differently. Yet over and over and over and over again, we don't meet that next moment. Over and over and over again, we fail to rationalize the goodwill, and we fail to materialize and manifest the ideals that we so often assert. And so I come here today, place of worship, humbled by that past, humbled by the fact that I've been part of that past as a former county supervisor, as a former mayor, as a former lieutenant governor, as a governor of the nation's largest state. The question I have to ask myself, the question we have to ask ourselves, are we capable of not just meeting this moment, but capable of doing justice to the moments in front of us? I could put together a group of advisors. I could put together a task force. I could promise and promote a few pieces of legislation. But I said this on Friday, I'll say it again, program passing is not problem solving. You got to change hearts, minds, you got to change culture, not just laws. And we have to own up to some very difficult things. The black community is not responsible for what's happening in this country right now. We are. We are. Our institutions are responsible. We are accountable to this moment. Let's just call that out. We have a unique responsibility to the black community in this country, and we've been playing lip service about that for generations. Generations.
like, what is your perspective of that?
I think that there's some truth in that. I think that the balance of power in this country has been so, tremendously lopsided for so long that, it's easy for, even with strong leaders, even with people that have been at the forefront of this fight for a long time, it's easy to continue to attempt to marginalize when the balance of power has been so egregious, and when the majority has been willing to turn a blind eye to these egregious offenses.
Right, right.
And so I appreciate the fact that someone is saying, hey, you know what? If this is actually going to change, we actually have to stand up and change it, which means that there's some acknowledgement that has to take place. And that means that, that they're going to have to begin leveraging their privilege and their power in order to do, what is right and what is righteous, what is fair, what we're deserving as human beings,
I
at the
mean,
end of the day.
all the way back to Rodney King, when you have those officers that beat that man, and we all saw the video
Hmm.
being acquitted, like, we're talking about compounded since then. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And I think it's important. Like, I appreciate them standing up for us in a protest, but I think it takes more than that. I think
Absolutely.
as you spoke about the DA, like, those are the voices that we need to speak on our behalf to make a
Yeah.
difference. We need laws changed. We need things of that nature. And it's going to take their privilege to change those things. It's going to take their votes to change those things. And unfortunately, I think the person who we have sitting in the leadership role of this freaking country is makes that extremely difficult. It's just, I can't. It's just crazy.
Well, I mean, it's in 1968, two black psychiatrists working in San Francisco penned a book called Black Rage. And even today, it still captures the essence of what we deal with every day. And so One of the things that they say is aggression leaps from wounds inflicted and ambition spiked. It grows out of oppression and capricious cruelty. It is logical and predictable if we know the soil from which it comes, that soil being
Mm-hmm.
slavery. And so
Mm-hmm.
when they talk about how what we see, this aggression and leaps from wounds inflicted and ambitious spiked, and it growing out of oppression and capricious cruelty. If you think of oppression, I want you to think of oppression as the macroaggressions and think of
Mm-hmm.
capricious cruelty as the microaggressions.
Mm-hmm.
They later go on to say that the black man of today is at one end of the psychological continuum, which reaches back in time to his enslaved ancestors. Observe closely a man on a Harlem street corner, and it can be seen how little his life experience differs from that of his forebears. However, much of his externals differ. Their inner life is remarkably the same. And so essentially, this thing takes on different forms, but it's really the same thing over and over and over again. And at some point, enough has to be enough.
Yeah, so there's a book, actually a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Have you heard of it by
Hmm.
Dr. Joy?
I
I don't know
have.
how to pronounce his
Yeah.
last name. It's
I've heard
like
of it. Yeah.
DeGruy or something like that. That
Hmm.
book is like the essence of everything that you're talking about right now. Like it goes back to like why we're here right now and how everything that has happened to us in the past, even if we didn't live in it, that
Hmm.
the byproduct of it is like how we feel, how we act, why you think the way that you do. I mean, it's deep. It was recommended to me by a great friend, and it's one of those things that I think it's not like just the people of color need to read it. I think it gives great perspective, even if you're a person that may not be black or a person that's white or not of color. I think that you can gain some powerful perspective from reading that book. So it's one that I definitely recommend. I definitely, while you were speaking, I was just visualizing how much the tears of Black people would weigh right now if we were to put them all together. Like it would be an ocean of tears for all of us that have cried just in the last, I say even in the last 24 hours, let alone
Yeah.
the last 48, 72. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
can you imagine how many people, because just like yourself have had, you've had moments where you've shed tears. I've had those same moments. And, a lot
Hmm.
of us are crying to ourselves,
Yeah.
And so if you just think about just that all over the nation. And even I saw something on the news that was saying that even over in Europe, they were marching for George Floyd. Like we're
Hmm.
talking about another country that's
Yeah.
fighting on our behalf. Like
Yeah.
here in the land of the free, right?
Hmm.
In the
Hmm.
land of the free, like people are some of them are feeling us,
Yeah.
and it's just like I said, ocean of tears.
Yeah. No doubt. It's interesting that you mentioned Europe. Like I had um, a brother that I know from my missionary work in Ethiopia to reach out to me. He's seen what happened to George Floyd and reached out and expressed his outrage. Um, and so
Yeah, I've
literally
had
this is,
people in Australia reach out to
yeah.
me and share and I do have white people that are extremely close to me and
Hmm.
I'm grateful for them, and I have had them reach out and share their support. So for those
Yes.
that are genuinely fighting on our behalf and genuinely supportive, I do thank them for raising their voice or for being present and for all of the things that they have done and are doing. I also want to just for some thought provoking, I had a coworker, former officer, retired, call me and just say, this visual. He sees this. He saw this visual of a KKK member holding a Black Lives Matter sign, and his
Mm.
reason. And I was like, that's deep. Like it gave me chills. And he wanted me to help him, create that image, because his point was not to say that white people are not for us. His point was to say that some people are capitalizing on the opportunity to come within our city
Mm.
under the disguise of being helpful and to destroy
Mm.
it. you know?
Wow.
And it's like, and then his caption was, he wanted to post it on Facebook, and the caption being, my mom said everybody ain't your friend. And I just thought that was so deep. Like, it gives me chills because that's true. And how do you discern and decipher between who is really, really for you and who is
Right.
not? And I think that, the people in your life, Stace, and in mine that are white and have been supportive even prior to this, have shown, it's not a and also, I mean, what I was gonna say is that they've been supportive. They've been there even before all of this. But what I was gonna
Absolutely.
say also with this George Floyd incident is it removed the grayscale. Like, there's no gray. It was black and white. It was like, nope, he killed this dude and it was wrong. He could have
Yeah.
been a white man, a white man, Asian, whatever. Like, he
Yeah.
blatantly killed this man. There's no shade of, off white, of gray, of charcoal, of, you know what I'm saying? There's none of that. Like, it was
Yeah.
simple, plain and simple. You saw it. And I think that I also wanted to acknowledge just the people that were on the video fighting and screaming for this man. Like, this man can't breathe. Check his pulse. Even a firefighter who was not black, she said, I'm a firefighter. And you need to check his pulse. Like, all of those people that went to war for that man during that time, I pray for them too, because that is a traumatic experience to witness. And even after all of this, like, they will still have visions of seeing that happen
Certainly.
in their presence. So I pray for them. I pray that they have peace and, just are able to get through this time, as I hope we all are.
So, Ashley, I know that you've been disconnected from television to some degree. Have you been following any of the Trump activities at all?
A couple of his tweets, I've seen here and there, but nothing too recent. Just like when the looting starts, the shooting starts, and his ridiculous comment regarding that, but nothing more than that.
So he's kind of doubled down on that particular mindset. He's now calling himself the law and order president, and is essentially directing governors of every state to fully deploy their National Guard in order to, basically control, civil unrest as he sees it. And so he does that, but also says that he is, in full support of peaceful protest. But the irony is that on the heels of him saying this, he then leaves out of the front of the White House, which is like almost unheard of. And as a result of that, a peaceful protest is broken up with tear gas and rubber bullets and all of that as he walks across the square to this presidential church, stands in front of the church with a Bible and begins to make this other, speech. And I guess he's trying to establish himself as something else in terms of, I don't know what. But it was clearly a photo opportunity. It was clearly something that appeared to be playing to an evangelical base. And so it really is, to me, something that is incredibly inflammatory. And it's really just stoking the flames of a raging fire already, in a way that is not doing anything, in terms of leadership to bring the tension down in the country, but actually ratchet it up and playing to a base that is likely already in opposition of everything that's going on. And so there's
Yeah.
nothing being said that's unifying. There's nothing being said that is bringing the temperature down, but exactly the opposite. And this is the leadership that we have at the top level. And it's incredibly unsettling for me. What are your thoughts hearing that?
Well, he's consistent. He's consistent with his behavior and his ridiculous character. I think he's a punk, and I think that he should be on the front line, riot gear, whatever. Let him feel what that feels like to be amongst the people. I think that Donald Trump is so far removed, and I say that confidently, not just for the fact that he's the president, but he's been a billionaire, and they all live in a bubble. You know what I'm saying? You're protected by there's this insulation and covering that you have with you and that he's had for so many years. So he's not with the people, regardless of those that support him or not. And I can speak on it because I work for him. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? Not for President Trump, but for the billionaire community, the quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote 1%ers. And I
Right.
know how a lot of them function, not all, obviously, but I know how a lot of them function. And so he's so far removed and feels so protected that he's going to say anything that he wants to say. I think it's just like the people I spoke about earlier being cowards that stand behind their keyboard and type
Mm-hmm.
whatever they want to type. Like he's doing it on camera, but yet he has Secret Service,
Yeah.
and another layer of protection on top of that. So it's like until you put this man on the front line and actually let him feel the wrath or the result or byproduct of the words that he's saying, he's going to
Yeah.
continue to speak ridiculously, and that's just some poor leadership that we have, unfortunately. And I'm hoping that history doesn't repeat itself and we get rid of him as soon as possible.
I need some of these evangelicals who support him. I need them to begin reading the same Bible that he was holding up. Because one of the things that was extremely clear to me was that he was uncomfortable, literally uncomfortable holding this Bible. And the thought came to mind that if you're uncomfortable holding a Bible in your hand, then the principles that are contained therein are certainly not in your heart. And so you're being pimped for your beliefs. You're being pimped for your religion.
You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks. You have to dominate. And you have to arrest people and you have to try people. And they have to go to jail for long periods of time.
With such poor leadership, Ashley, who do you think should be leading us?
That I don't have an answer, Unfortunately, I don't have an answer. I think that speaks to just too many chiefs and not enough Indians. But I also think that our leadership options are diluted. Like everybody is influenced by something. And I think that everybody's influenced by the system that has been created. So I think in order to kind of dissect that and rebuild it, we need to start reading more, watching less TV. We need to start researching more. And I'm not just talking about Google. I'm talking about like going back in the books and reading books that our ancestors have written, read about where we've come from and what power we've had that's been taken away from us. I think that a lot of stuff that we need to be informed about will help us be empowered and understand the strength and power that we have that has been completely taken away and not only suppressed, but just removed and changed. So I think, when you ask me who should lead us, it's like we need to kind of tear something down before we could build something up. And I think that's the biggest thing.
I think what's interesting is that, COVID-19 kind of overshadowed the fact that we're actually in a presidential election year. And so Joe Biden has kind of faded to black. I know that he has made a statement here or there, but the noise has been so loud that you forget that he's even, the presumptive candidate of the Democratic, nomination or the Democratic Party, for the nomination. And so I know that there's been talk of him also potentially, choosing a woman VP and potentially choosing a black woman VP. And so I'm wondering if all of that kind of converges in this space of what's going on right now that could potentially end, Trump's presidency and potentially elevate Joe Biden if he makes some very strategic choices and shows some decisive and very visible and vocal, leadership moves, in this period of time. I'm not sure, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, and I truly appreciate your perspective, your insight, and your words of wisdom. If I'm being honest, just like I told all the people to be, it's hard for me to trust anything politically right now. It's hard for me to trust anybody's motives, their intent. It's just that realm of territory, I guess, for lack of a better word, is really hard for me to even talk about in this space. So I know that Donald Trump is not something who I would like to see continue to see in office. But I don't have a person that I would like to see fill that space that I'm completely confident in. So
Yeah.
my hope is that whomever it may be, that it
Mm-hmm.
be to better this country for sure.
So make no mistake about it. I'm not even saying that that Joe Biden is the best, but I do appreciate that some time ago that he was being held to account and asking for what his black agenda was. And
Hmm.
given the climate of things right now, I don't think that you can expect to ascend to the presidency and not have one. Um, I think that you have to have one, and I think that we have to begin leveraging our political capital in such a way that we start being far more decisive in our demands. And then the other thing that I think that we need to do is that if we can stop having so many experts and so many self-proclaimed leaders, is that we can begin establishing people that are skilled at leading at the forefront on a more localized level, that help us to move initiatives forward, at the local level, because it's very difficult to get things accomplished when you're trying to do it, on a macro level. But when we have, localized leadership that is effective, we can get far more done far more quickly in our
Hmm.
local municipalities than we can if we're waiting on some federal mandate to come down and for these things to trickle down. And so there kind of has to be a certain level of bottom up leadership if we actually want to get things done more quickly and more effectively, because the needs are different all over the country. There are some common threads that run throughout, but the needs are also different all over the country.
Yeah, at this point, I say put Kanye in office and let's just see what happens.
We could talk about that on the next episode. So Ashley, it's that time again. You got 3 cents for the folks.
Man, I got a quarter for y'all.
Let's go.
Emotionally heavy. I just say, people, be honest with yourself. I think the soul of you knows exactly what's truth and
Yeah.
exactly what to do. And I think that it's important and imperative for us to not suppress that voice. If that means, like Stacy said earlier, that you cry or you be angry, as long as you're not having any violent behavior against another person or destruction to somebody's personal property or taking something that doesn't belong to you, I think it's important that we're all honest with ourselves and with each other. Sometimes it's not a good time to talk to people. Sometimes you might feel a little short-tempered or snappy at somebody who hasn't harmed you or done anything to you, and it's because of like you said, the temperature of what's going on right now. And so I think it's important that we speak up when feeling led to, that we stay silent when we feel led to, and that we just be really honest with where we are right now. And I think that's the healthy thing for us to do, because a lot of this is so heavy, and I think a lot of us even have this post-traumatic stress disorder where we keep getting these bruises pressed and we're feeling something that we felt before, but it's being magnified because we continue to feel it over and over and over again. Some of us need to write, just to write your thoughts, even if you just throw them away, but just to get them out. I think it's important that we don't keep those things in our mind and to ourselves, because it's like you said, that pressure cooker, stuff is just boiling over. If there's somebody that you want to confide in or talk to, I think that you need to seek out that person. Just keep in mind, some people can handle your heavyweight, some people can't handle your heavyweight. So you got to know who to trust with what information, with what emotion, with what you're feeling, because you definitely don't want to talk to somebody that's going to make you feel worse than what you feel right now. So I think we should be mindful, take time to ourselves, but at the bottom line and at the root of everything, we just need to be really honest with how we're feeling. Yes, Stace, so you got 3 cents for the people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I'm having to grapple with in terms of, my faith and my pastoral, responsibility is that, like on one hand, I'm told that I can, the Bible tells me I can be angry, but in that same verse, it tells me not to sin. So it says, be angry and sin not. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that I view that is that it's the tension that occurs between rage and righteousness. But I have the right to feel this rage, but I can't sin. But if every expression of emotion that I have ever, allowed to spill out of me is characterized as something that is a threat or negative or menacing, then I don't want to be perceived that way. So I suppress it. And so, there's this, perception that just because I'm a believer that I have to be, docile. But when you really look at the ministry of Jesus, the Bible says that he was without sin. He did not sin. But we also see an instance where he came into an environment in the temple and he was turning over tables because things were not being done the way that they were supposed to be. That there were some systemic issues that were wrong, that he was staunchly against. And so I say that to say that for those of you that are out there that are struggling with this whole idea of, I'm angry, but, I don't want to do damage. It is still okay for you to express yourself, because I think that if you don't, we're continuing to perpetuate this pressure cooker mentality where we continue to stuff. And at some point, that this thing is going to blow. And so, I just wanted to make sure that I got it out there that, that to be angry is to have settled opposition against something. And so you dig your feet in that it's wrong. And it's okay for you, and I'm the alliteration guy as a preacher, right? But It's okay for you to express your anger in your tears, your tone, and your tantrum, which means that, it's okay for you to cry, because there have been several moments over the last couple of weeks where I've just had to just cry because I didn't know what to do with all that I was feeling. And I had to be able to let that out because it was just too much for me to take. I had to let it out. And then it's okay for you to express your anger in your tone, that sometimes you need to show people that you have a righteous indignation about whatever it is that's occurring around you. And they need to know that you're serious and know you don't need to apologize for it. And then even in your tantrum, that it's okay for you to express the fact that you were upset. It doesn't mean that you go out and you hurt people. It doesn't mean that you go out and you break windows and you take things that don't belong to you. But it's okay for you to be physically demonstrative of the fact that you were upset, that you have that right as a human being. And so, yes, you can be angry and you don't have to do things that violate your moral consciousness, that you can have both of these things occur in the same space, and they're not in opposition of one another.
Man, I think that was some 3 cents for the people. All good.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for another episode of the 3 Cents Podcast. We know that our tone and our tenor was a little bit different than what you're used to. However, we want to make sure that we're real and we're relevant and timely in what we seek to give you in terms of educating you, inspiring you, informing you, and at the very least, entertaining you. So we hope that something that we talked about today has given you some measure of solace, some measure of peace. And I just want to remind you that, that justice is a judicial verdict, which means that all of the evidence has to be reviewed and carefully considered before a verdict can be handed down. So anytime that you see injustice, it means that the facts of the case have been tried in the street, and that somebody has put themselves in the position to be judge, jury, and executioner. And so we're hoping that the 3 Cents Nation will rise up and be people that will stand against injustice, because they understand that all of the evidence has to be carefully reviewed before a verdict can be handed down. So no one individual can do that on a street corner in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or on a train platform in Oakland, California. And so if you want to send us any questions, you can always do so at 3centspodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on IG or Facebook at 3 Cents Podcast. You can follow me, _Stacy B. Jones on IG, or at Stacy B. Jones on Twitter. Ashley, what you got for the people?
Man, you can find me on IG, SoundCloud, Twitter, Facebook, and whatever else account I may have out there at Ashley Rain, your girl. Reaching everyone in God's name and #Perspective Advocate. As always, we thank every listener for tuning in. We thank you all for your support. Welcome to a new season of the 3 Cents Podcast, where we always give you more than our 2 cents. Until next time, we out. Peace.
Holla.